This is the second part of the Unit Advancement Chair, Part 2, the Gnarly topics. I just love the name.
Well, you picked it, right?
Yeah, yes. I think many of you are coming in from the previous session on the Advancement Chair. Again, welcome. I know Sally did an excellent job. Oh, there she is. I don't want to say too much, it'll go to her head. An excellent job with the first part training. Before we get started, I would really appreciate folks if they could turn on their videos so we can see level of engagement. Having said that, we are recording the sessions. And so if you have youth that are around and in the background, you certainly may leave your video off. Okay. So Sally gave you all the basics in the previous session on the unit advancement chairs. We're really covering kind of the second part, what really does happen and what are some of the difficult calls that you as an advancement chair have to deal with. So we're going to cover some things around judgment calls, which are around active participation. What does it mean? Positions of responsibility versus positions of leadership and time in position. What is Scout spirit? What is duty to God? And troop expectations beyond stated requirements. These are the judgment calls, the things that are not black and white necessarily. We're also going to talk about appeals to Board of Reviews, the decisions that are made there. Eagle Board's review under disputed circumstances, we'll talk about that. And then we'll talk about special needs, Scout with special needs, and how to assist them with alternate requirements. And then we'll wrap it up with extensions. How do you do that? What's the process for that? We do have a panel approach for today's session. There's a lot of stuff that's covered here, and we have an enormous wealth of knowledge and expertise here on the call. I will let Fred and Laura introduce themselves. Fred, you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is Fred Connolly. I'm currently the Council Advancement Chair, and so a lot of these things end up on my plate. I have 30 years experience, everything from Scoutmaster, Cub positions, commissioner staff, advancement. So I've been around a couple of times.
Great. Thank you, Fred. Laura, you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is Laura Jeck. I am the Quicksilver Advancement Chair. And some of my expertise, of course, lies in the education world. I have 30 years as a teacher, and I have been a scouting all my life, but I have been with BSA for about 15 years with my boys and my daughter adventuring.
Great. Thank you, Laura. Thank you, Fred. My name is Todd Hausholt. I'm the Advancement Chair for Pioneer District. I've been involved in scouting for a really, really long time with my boys, both in leadership positions and as a scout, as a youth. Fred's been around the block a couple of times, as have I. This is one of the best jobs in scouting, volunteering around advancement, because you just get to see kind of the best of the program and the best of the scouts. It's a great position to participate with. The format of the class, we're going to cover each of the, quote, gnarly topics. Hopefully we'll cover each of those topics in about 5 to 7 minutes. In some cases, we'll just do a quick review of the policy and move on. We do want to meet your expectations of being timely, but also be able to have a few minutes at the end to answer any questions and have open discussion as we go through these. Okay. We're going to cover the judgment calls. And again, I mentioned those earlier. You're active in the unit, serving in a position of responsibility, demonstrating the scouting spirit and duty to God. And these are the ones that, as an advancement chair in a troop or a unit, typically get a lot of questions. So being active in your unit, it really is around, has the scouting program been able to have an impact on the youth. Being active in your unit does not mean that you have attended 80% of the troop meetings and 100% of the outings. Those things, we're not allowed to put policies in for that unless they are related to the position of responsibility. So we want to be really careful. We want to be able to think about, has the program itself had an impact on the scout? And that's really what they're talking about when they refer to active in your unit. There are some tests that BSA has put together to help us with that. The first one is the scout registered? So if their registration lapsed and they didn't participate in the chartering, that means they have left the program. All right. If they're registered, they're still involved in the program, then it's really around how, what are the activities that they have been involved in, and how has the program impacted them. A scout is in, the second criteria is a scout is in good standing. He is considered in good standing with the unit as long as the scout has not been dismissed for disciplinary reasons. Same thing for the scout that's standing in a local council or in the broader Boy Scouts of America. Okay. And then the third criteria is around the scout is meeting the unit's reasonable expectations. And if not, if not, are those the reason they haven't participated, is it because of another outside activity or an event that's happened in their family? So in other words, if a lesser level has occurred, can it be explained? Does the troop meet on Tuesday nights and he has to compete with a confirmation class with his church, or he has to compete with Little League or whatever it may be? Okay, and those are things that can be explained. It doesn't mean that those are always the first choices. Okay. Any comments from the panel, Laura or Fred? I know Sally's on here as well, or Sally, around this be active in your unit topic.
I just want to clarify a couple of things. A scout is in good standing. I have seen many troops that have, as part of their criteria for a board of review is the scout current in their dues? And that cannot be used as a discriminator against allowing a scout to advance. So I just want to make sure that, because I have seen that multiple times where a scout has been prevented because for whatever reason, he wasn't current in either family dues or patrol dues, and that just isn't allowed to prevent them from advancing.
Yeah, thank you, Fred. That's a great point. The good standing is really more related to behavior and interaction with other scouts. It's not about his financial situation. So thank you.
Todd, I also wanted to point out or ask you to clarify a unit's activity policy and how that relates to this.
Okay. So many troops have had participation or unit activity participation where they've said you have to be active in the troop by attending 75% of the meetings or things like that. And that's really not a criteria for being active in the unit. Again, it goes back to, has the program had an impact on the scout? Now, having said that, a lot of times in the position of responsibility, they will have a job description, so to speak, of that position, whether it be senior patrol leader, quartermaster, whatever it is. And in those job positions for the troop, they would actually put in, there is a criteria, they have to be at the meetings, a certain percentage. For example, an SPL really can't do his job if he only shows up to 50% of the troop meetings. Okay. And so if a unit puts in criteria like that, it needs to be position related and it needs to be reasonable. Does that help?
Yes, but I was policy, a unit is allowed to define what makes an active scout, but additionally, it's also, this impact piece is critical to point out that it's during those 4 or 6 months prior to or during that star or life rank, correct?
They're actually not allowed to put activity requirements in there unless it's related to a position. It's really around that position.
You
And
will,
Fred?
you will
Well,
see,
that's why I wanted you to clarify that.
Yeah, thank you.
you
Fred?
will see in many cases for especially the older scouts where they're active on student body activities at school, where they're demonstrating ideals that they learned in scouting, but it also conflicts with their ability to participate actively with the troop. So that's one of those where activity is explained.
Exactly. Yep. Thank you, Fred. Okay. All right. The next one is position of responsibility. And I frequently will hear troops, say leadership position. And I want to be really clear, it is not always a leadership position that fulfills these requirements for both Star, Life, and Eagle. It is a position of responsibility. Those positions of responsibility are important. In some cases, they are leadership. In other cases, they are really a support function. And it's critical that the troop have both leaders and these support functions. Okay. Again, I'm not going to go through listing all of the positions. Those are in the Scout Handbook. Star in Life, the unit leader may assign a leadership project if that troop is not able to meet all the positions for all of the scouts at that time. A lot of times in very large troops that will run across, there isn't enough roles to play. And so some of the really large troops, they will have, one SPL and 2 or 3 ASPLs as an example. It's a way of giving an opportunity. Now, just because they are an ASPL, it doesn't mean that they aren't doing their job. They have to do the job, and the troop and the unit needs to be able to divide up the positions so that they're all having some role in that position. As it states here, there can be a leadership project that can be given for Star and Life. And they would consult with the advancement committee and the unit committee to agree on the standards of what that project might look like. Again, giving them that opportunity to have that position. The requirement is measured in months, 4 months for Star, 6 months for Life and Eagle. It does not need to be consecutive, and it may involve multiple positions. They could do 3 months of this and 3 months of that to get the 6-month requirements for Life and Eagle. Okay. Laura, Sally, or Fred, anything you want to add? We're going to talk a little about expectations for a minute. Anything on that one that you want to cover?
No, I think that my comments are on the next slide.
Yep. Okay. All right. Unit expectations. All right. What I've always been telling troops as I do a lot of training around the district is having a job description for those positions of responsibility is so critical to help the scout. Just as an adult in the work world, you have a position description that talks about the things that are expected of you. Again, in the troop, having documented expectations and communicated expectations for the scout is really important. Establishing those, communicating them, and then within reason, because we all know that the scouts at this age have different levels of maturity. And so we need to be able to set the expectations that fit to the scouts' abilities. That doesn't mean we give it to them. It means we understand their personal situation and then set the criteria for them so that they can be successful in achieving it and also pushing them. A scout should be offered direction and coaching and support. Typically, this is done by the scoutmaster. Okay, if they've clearly communicated the expectations up front and the scout is not fulfilling those expectations, it needs to be communicated to the scout early on in his tenure of that position, giving the scout the opportunity to improve, working with him, giving some tasks, giving the scout some direction and so on. If no expectations are established and direction is not offered, then a reasonable effort is considered to have met the requirements. And that's why it's way better to have established the expectations than to let it just happen. The decision to remove a scout from the position or not to give credit is a leadership decision. It's not something that is done at the board of review. Again, you want to give the scout early warning and also give them the coaching to fulfill it. I will let Fred comment, and Sally and Laura as well.
Well, here's one of those where it becomes the gnarly situation. And that is, if a scout is not meeting expectations, then he has to be counseled, regularly and often, and given an opportunity to improve. You certainly don't want to get to the end of the period of performance. Many troops use 6 months in office, some are a year, but you don't want to get to the end of that period and tell the scout you're not going to get credit for your 6 months to a year. It should never come as a surprise to the scout, just like as in a job performance appraisal at work. And technically, my belief is the scout should get credit for all the time he's in that position until he is removed. So if at 2 months' time into it, you remove him, maybe you have this assistant patrol leader take over, but up until the time that he's removed, he should get credit for that position, even though he may not have met some of the expectations. So and then it comes down to, at the end, this is one of those things where, and I think we'll talk about it later, as far as having a board review under disputed circumstances. But that's what I wanted to say about that. So
thanks, Fred. Any other commentary or? Okay, all right. So I think we're stepping right into it, Fred. If the scout believes they have performed the duties satisfactorily and the leader disagrees, it is up to the leader to consider were the expectations unreasonable or not clearly conveyed. And that's something that they should consider and think through. Again, and it's not, we all know that the scouts mature at a different rate, and making sure that, again, that we are being fair to the scout and reasonable to the troop, because the troop also has to meet, have been led or have those positions fulfilled. If there are discussions, or if after discussions with the scouts and the leaders, and this also may include the parents, that they still believe that the expectations were unreasonable, then upon completing the remaining requirements, a board of review must be granted, right? And in the case of Eagle, it would be under the disputed circumstances. For a life, again, it would go to the troop's board of review and understand and discuss the issues as they see them, and then make render their decision. Again, it's one of the gnarly topics, and we know that each of these scouts have a different set of issues, and we want to make sure that we're, again, being fair to the scout, but also being true to the policy. Any additional things you want to add to that one, Fred?
no, that's good.
Okay, great. Or Laura or Sally? I think Sally dropped off.
Yeah, Sally's there.
Oh, okay.
I'm here.
Okay. All right. Evaluating scout spirit. This is always one that when I do training with troop committees and with parents, they always say, well, what does that mean? And it's really looking at the ideals of scouting, the oath and the law. And it's really saying, has the scout incorporated those things in their daily life? Have they thought those things, and have they practiced those things? The scoutmaster is the one that really evaluates the scout spirit by getting to know the scout, not necessarily in the scoutmaster conference, but although that is a prime opportunity, but it's also during their regular meetings with the scout. And the scoutmaster should really be asking probing questions. Again, there are some Scoutmasters I've had discussions with that said, hey, you know, he only attended 50% of the meetings. How can he have Scout spirit? And it's really not looking at it at the troop meeting, the spirit in the troop meeting, although that's true too, but it's also in their life. How do they go about living the oath and law while they're at school, whether in their sports activities, whether they're in their band activities, their church, whatever it is? Can they be exhibiting the spirit during that time? Ultimately, it is the decision of the unit leader who signs the requirement. It is not measured by counting the meetings or outings that have attended. And the evaluation takes into account the other activities that the Scout may be participating in, and then again, demonstrating those values and that spirit. I've had, like I said, numerous cases, and it's been boards of review or Scoutmaster conferences that have been refused by the Scoutmaster. And I've had to step in and walk through that with them and better educate them. It is difficult. It's a difficult conversation at times. Fred, Laura, or Sally, any?
Well, you know, it's, you know, on some of these things, the troop bylaws, you know, need to be clearly identified. And sometimes it's a case of if a Scout is being disruptive in a troop meeting, you know, what is the troop policy toward handling that and working toward that? So again, and it comes up time and time again, the more clear and well-defined your troop bylaws are and enforced, the better off you're going to be in the long run.
Yeah, one of the things that came up in the board's review class was, it would be related to this question, is what if one of the board of review members thinks the Scout has not shown good spirit or has been disruptive or whatever. And one of the things that we talked about is if someone comes into a board of review with an issue or a preconceived notion, those things ought to be identified before you even bring the Scout in, talked about, maybe go talk to the Scoutmaster who knows more about what's going on, and get those issues on the table first and dealt with rather than in the board of review with the Scout.
That's a great point, Sally. I had a Eagle board a couple of months ago that one of the members of the committee and the board of review committee delayed the Scouts rank advancement for Eagle. And it was really interesting because the Scout has, I don't want to call it a learning disability, it's a personality trait that made it really, really difficult in the board of review. And so we delayed the board of review, we came back, we met with them, and it was interesting because the Scoutmaster can't be in the board of review, but we brought the Scoutmaster into the conversation, to your point, addressing it ahead of time. And the Scoutmaster just started talking about some of the issues with the Scout. And it wasn't that he wasn't Eagle worthy, it was some of these personality traits and issues that came up. And it's way better to get those things addressed, not in the board of review, but ahead of time through Scoutmaster conference and also educating the board. So great point. So we've talked about troop expectations, and Fred mentioned pretty much it's the last bullet on there. You know, troop expectations of payment of dues is not something that's going to prevent the Scout from fulfilling his, you know, his roles. There are lots of issues with that, and troop expectations really need to be written, and Fred called them the troop bylaws. They need to be written down, and they need to be communicated to the Scouts. They need to be clear and they need to be reasonable. And reasonable is, again, understanding the Scout and the life that Scout has. And so we don't want troops to be putting in bylaws that prevent the Scouts from being able to participate in the advancement through this program. The program itself has so many positive things. We want to make sure that this is not one of those things that catches up a Scout and discourages a Scout. So again, the troop expectations need to be reasonable, They need to be written down and they need to be communicated to the scout and the family.
And consistently applied.
There we
Oh,
go. I
thank
was trying to say the same thing.
you. Applied.
Well, they don't count against the scoutmaster's son. It's not the same for him as anybody else in the troop.
Oh, I'm glad you said that, Fred. I'm kidding. That was a joke. All right. All right. The next one is one I know a lot of us struggle with, especially in the Eagle Board of Review, and it's the duty to God. It's a great question. It's one that should be reviewed not just at the Eagle Board of Review, but one that should be discussed at every Board of Review. It is a sensitive topic. It is controversial. There are so many religious movements out there, and we're not trying to say one is right and one is wrong. It's really around what does the scout participate in? What does the scout believe? The oath and law that the scout has reiterated for 5, 6, 7 years during their scouting career, I will do my best to do my duty to God. The scout law, a scout is reverent. He or she is reverent towards God. He or she is faithful in his or her religious duties. What I say to Eagle boards is there are very few wrong answers here, but if you don't ask the question, you don't really understand the scout's ability to comprehend what his faith is and those around him. Saying that you don't believe in God or saying that you don't believe in a higher being, that's a really tough call. And so a lot of times we will try and work the scout through that, but it is a question and it is something that needs to be addressed in the scouting program and in the life of a scout. I know it's one of the questions that I always ask in the Eagle board, because most of the Eagle boards don't want to talk about it because it is controversial. But like I said, there are very few wrong answers here. Everybody is in a different journey of their faith, and we're trying to see where he or she is in his journey. Fred, Laura, or Sally, any comments, or the rest of the group, any questions?
In the scout registration application, on fine print just inside the cover, there says that BSA does have an expectation of the belief in a higher power. So, because I've had people say, well, where is that ever written that that's a requirement? And I just want to say it is listed on the scout application. I haven't looked at one in the last 12 months, so I won't say that it hasn't been deleted, but it should still be there as an expectation of belief in a higher power or being, whatever that might be. And so it is something, that can derail a, Eagle Board of Review.
Yep.
Fred, it's still there. I just checked it a couple days ago because I gave a talk on religious emblems. So it is absolutely still there.
We got an expert here. Thank you, Bob. A lot of times, and we all know this as we are working with our scouts, the scout and the scout's family may not go to any church or synagogue or other institution, but frequently the parents will have some faith, some set of values that they have articulated and demonstrated to their children. And a lot of times, you can ask questions around that as well. But again, it really should be a question that is asked and addressed in the boards of review, not just Eagle, but all of them. Okay. All right. If the scout is not ready for advancement, this is the easy topic. If the board decides not to approve the advancement, we're not approving the candidate, but not approving the advancement. The candidate must be informed and told what he or she can do to improve. If the scout agrees, the board may defer the decision and reconvene at a later time, hopefully with the same members, so it makes it easier to have some consistency in the discussion. That's not always possible, but That would be the preferred thing. If the scout does not agree with what the board's decision is, they have some opportunities. The board should send a follow-up letter to the scout, and more than likely to the scout and the parents, about why he or she was not approved for advancement. That letter would also include actions that will advise them to lead them to get to that advancement, and an explanation of the appeals process. The scout and or parent may appeal to the council, and that's why we have Fred here. It says the council must review the letter. Over the 12 years, I've run across a couple of these. They're never a fun conversation, but it is an important conversation. What I tell the board and I tell the scout is this is a great learning opportunity. And I know most scouts hate to hear that it's a learning opportunity, but it is. It is an opportunity for the scout to reflect on what he or she has been told and how they can improve and how they can get on to the next step. Okay. Questions or comments on that?
I would suggest that even if the scout agrees, that you write a letter to the scout and his parents, so there's no disagreement down the road as to what was determined. And the scout may come out of it and go to his parents and may not have the same sense of what you guys expressed in the board. He may have heard it differently, even though he agreed with it. So always better to follow it up with a written statement.
Yeah, and Fred, thank you. I have been caught on that because what the scout heard versus what the letter said, they seemed, in one case, it seemed like it was the sky is blue, the sky is black conversation. It was so different in terms of what was received. And that's, so your point is making sure it's documented so that people can have a conversation around what was actually occurred and what the board said.
Certainly in the case of an appeal, notes that were taken during that board review are relevant documentation.
Absolutely. Thank you, Fred.
Question.
Yeah.
Could you give us some solid examples of why would a board consider a scout as not ready when all his or her requirements were checked off? Some examples so that I understand what exactly are we talking about here.
So I'll give you a real life example. It happened 2 or 3 years ago. And it was regarding the Eagle project. So the requirement for an Eagle project is to, I'm going to skip the words here, plan, develop, lead, and give service to others. Okay. The district approves a proposal. And the proposal is kind of what it is they're going to do. Are they on the right path for whatever that project is? We approve that. The next steps for the scout is to plan and develop the detailed leadership activity. And I tell the story when I teach the project reviews. It's a great story. So I track all of the hours of every Eagle project that's come through Pioneer District. And on average, it's about 200 hours. Now, keep in mind, this is not a requirement. This is not a standard. It's just something I've tracked for 12 years. This particular scout came through and his hours were something like 1,100 or 1,200 hours. I mean, it was off the chart. And I am looking at this, I'm looking at his application and getting ready to do the board review. And I'm thinking, what? This is amazing. That's a lot of time that this scout has contributed. So we get into the board of review and come to find out, we did the proposal review on Thursday and he started his workday on Saturday without the development plan. He made 7 or 8 trips to Home Depot to buy things because he didn't have his material list together. He had to have 7 or 8 work days instead of 2 or 3 that would probably have been required if he'd had a plan. And he didn't fulfill the requirement of his Eagle project. And I'll tell you, it was an extremely difficult conversation that we talked with the scout about. And so we asked him to think about it, and we asked him to retroactively, what would he have done differently and how would he have planned it? And so he did agree that he didn't do the plan. Again, like Fred said, we did write the letter. We documented what we had told the scout and what we asked him to do. And we asked him to let us know when he was ready for another board review. So that's an example of a scout that was not yet ready for advancement. And was he ready? I think he was ready. He chose not to follow the requirements. Does that help?
Yes, that definitely helps. Thank you. I understand that with an Eagle project, there are a lot of gray areas and there's no, things could go wrong. But I'm looking for any specific example for lower ranks where there is a clear set of check boxes that needs to be ticked off. Does things like that ever happen for lower ranks?
It
Yes.
does. And I'm gonna let Sally, Laura, and Fred. I'm sure you guys all have stories. I certainly do as well, but I don't want to be the one talking the whole time. So you guys have some examples in those lower ranks?
Sally, do you want to speak to that?
Yeah, go ahead, Fred.
No, I was asking you to go ahead.
Oh, all right. In the board of review class, Eve talks about, the scout who got in there and they asked him about his position of responsibility. He said, well, I was supposed to be quartermaster.
Quartermaster.
Well, quartermaster was one story, or the other one was the chaplain aide. But in either case, they were like, well, so what did you do? Well, I didn't really do anything because I didn't know what I was supposed to do. So they talked to the scout and the scout, no, I did not fulfill the requirement because I didn't do anything. So they chose option one. The scout agreed he hadn't done anything, and they gave him 3 months to go off and they explained what the job was supposed to be. He went off and did it, and then they reconvened the board 3 months later, and they talked about it and finished and signed him off. So you got two issues there. One is the scout was not ready for the board, but then you go back to the leadership and say, how did this scout get assigned a position without any training or expectations being delivered to them? How did he not know what to do? And two, how did he get signed off without anybody checking to see that he'd actually done something? So, you got two problems to fix. This one is in the process for the troop, and the other one is, okay, let's make sure that the scout actually fulfills the requirements.
But additionally, before the scout ever arrives at the board of review, there is a Scoutmaster conference.
Yeah.
And that Scoutmaster conference is a place where these issues should surface. And the Scoutmaster can certainly say, you know what, we're not quite ready yet. Yes, you've met these requirements, but not this one. Or you've met all of these, but not that one. Or maybe there is a history of disruptive behavior during meetings, or scout spirit has an issue because that scout might be unsatisfactorily interacting with other scouts. So that Scoutmaster conference is critical to the advancement process, and that Scoutmaster can and should be having those conversations with the advancement chair.
Yeah, excellent point, Laura. And that you're talking about when the process is working well and the Scoutmaster is not just going through the motions, but actually, really thinking about the requirements and treating each scout as an individual. And that actually happened to my son. He was 12 years old and going for his life board review, and the Scoutmaster said, Andrew, your behavior is not inappropriate. Well, and Bob knows my son very well. And you know, thank goodness for Cal for, you know, having the integrity to do this. He said, Scott, you know, Andrew, you're appropriate for a 12-year-old, but you're not acting the way we want and the older, you know, high level scouts to be performing and leading in the troop. And so you need to just take some time to observe and practice leadership and just grow up a little bit. And it was absolutely the right thing to do. But
And
as
Sally,
you say, Laura,
your
you know,
point,
the
the
scoutmasters have to step up and actually do this. It shouldn't actually come to the board of review to be making those decisions and have to overrule somebody who was signed off inappropriately.
And that's, Sally, that's so right. It's much
It
easier
is so important.
in a one-on-one conversation, you know, Scoutmaster conference. And when I say one-on-one, of course, it's YPT. In a one-on-one conversation with the scout to give them that feedback. It is so much more difficult and more devastating to the scout when this occurs in the board of review. You know, there you got a 12-year-old scout with, you know, four people doing a board of review, and it's extremely difficult for the scout, especially if they're 12, to have the maturity to be able to respond and accept that feedback. And so the Scoutmaster Conference is so critical in this role. Hopefully that makes sense. I want to move on because we're supposed to be done at 10 till. I want to make sure we cover everything. Filing appeal. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but there are avenues. So if the scout or the parents don't feel like their scout is being given a fair shake, or the expectations are reasonable, there is an appeal process. And you can work with either your district chair or your district advancement chair, because sometimes it's difficult to do it within the troop. So, you know, work with your district advancement person to help them through that process. If it's an Eagle issue, that typically will end up going between the district up to the council in the appeals process. Okay. Eagle Board of Review under disputed circumstances, again, very similar. There is an avenue. If the board is saying, no, this is not an Eagle Scout, or they haven't met the requirements, there is an appeal process. It would go to the district, and it would go to, it would go to the council, because the district is participating in the Scouts Board. I'm going through these too quickly because I want to hit the last two topics, because I think they're really difficult ones for advancement chairs. And I apologize, Fred, Sally, or Laura, anything you want to hit on those two slides before we go into the special needs?
Yeah, let's do that, because let's make sure we do that.
Okay, great. All right. And I would like to turn it over to Laura, and hopefully, Laura, I know you're in the car. Hopefully you'll be able to walk through this one. If not, I can help out. Laura, you're on mute. Oh,
Here I am.
Yeah.
So very importantly, the very last one is the most critical of it. And that is that if a scout is someone who is moving through the educational process, perhaps not as successfully or more slowly, and those things filter into scouting, that should all be addressed far earlier than 17 and a half. We should not be looking at a scout with disabilities at 17 and a half. It is, if they have issues, bring them up. Parents and scoutmasters know these scouts best, and they need to be brought forward and communicated. It's probably the most important piece. No council, committee, unit, district, anyone has the ability to add or subtract from the document requirements. You cannot modify, even if a scout has ADHD, has other learning specific behaviors, you cannot modify that. It's not an option. We can support and scaffold as much as we can as a unit. That's why it has to be brought to the unit's attention early. However, if they're moving through educational process correctly and successfully, those things can be applied to scouting as well. And so communication is of the most important piece here.
So Laura, on the physical disabilities, can you maybe touch on some of those as well?
So with physical limitations, there are ways to accommodate. So accommodation is different than.
I think we lost you. What she was going to say was,
Sorry.
are you back?
I'm sorry. I guess, yeah, I'm back. You can accommodate. The two words are very different. So a scout who is in a wheelchair, their physical disabilities can be accommodated by looking at what they can do, not what they can't do. And so accommodation is well within scouting. All over the place, we accommodate scouts doing everything within their ability levels. We cannot change it, and that's the difference. The requirement cannot be changed. You can't remove it, but you can accommodate. So a scout in a wheelchair playing soccer, that physical activity is the same for that tenderfoot rank.
And she's muted again.
Oh, okay.
We lost her.
Yeah. So
I'm here.
Oh.
Questions? Anybody else jump in here?
So I want to just tell a very brief story. It was my second summer camp with our troop, and one of the boys had a particular circumstance where one of his legs was amputated below the knee, and we accommodated, and I thank you for the words, accommodated him in his swimming merit badge. We didn't change the requirements. We provided some accommodations while he was in the lake so that he could complete the requirements. And again, every special need needs to be evaluated and understood so that you're accommodating and not changing, to Laura's point. And so I think it's really helpful to have people, like Laura as a teacher and an educator who understands kind of the non-physical ailments, but also understand those things and get help. Again, we cannot change those requirements through this process. The accommodation, especially when you're looking at ADD or ADHD, the accommodation is more of the leadership of the troop helping that scout through their requirements, keeping them on task if the focus is an issue for them, but not saying, hey, you don't have to do those things. So Brad or Sally,
and recognizing that.
Oh, yeah. Go ahead, Laura.
I was just going to say, recognizing that ADD and ADHD are actually not learning disabilities. And it's important to recognize them as other and not a learning disability. They need to be escorted through the process, and that's not anything other than accommodation. ADD and ADHD scouts are just as capable as every other scout, and it should not be put up as a reason to not advance or not participate in the program.
And you've addressed ADD. You did not call out just like learning disabilities.
So let's,
In those cases, sometimes the scout just needs more time. They can do the stuff as written. They just need more time to do it, and that's why we have the ability to register them. They call it register beyond the age of eligibility. So, you know, somebody might need to until they're 30 to actually finish all of the requirements, and if that's what it takes, that's fine with it. That is an option. But that's a lot of paperwork required. And again, as you said earlier, Laura, it's not something that should be discovered at age 17 and a half. If the scouts got that level of issues, it should have been obvious years ago, and that paperwork should have been started years ago.
Yeah. So typically those scouts have educational history, and they have IEPs, and they belong to special day classes, and those scouts have history, and bringing it to the attention of the leadership so that they can be registered. Cognitive and physical, they are long lasting, they are not changing. And it doesn't matter whether they are registered at 12 or at 17. Those are things that we need to give that scout every opportunity to do it themselves. But at the same time, it is communication beyond a shadow of a doubt that parents be open with the unit leadership to their scouts' abilities.
Yep. Thank you, Laura. I think that the very last shout out box on this slide, and this is one that I've relied on Laura in the past, is I don't always feel comfortable understanding the various scenarios. I'm not an expert in this. And, you know, I rely on someone like Laura to help me because I want to make sure I'm being fair to the scout and to the program. And so I'm thankful for people like Laura. So thank you, Laura. All right, we've got one last slide, and it's with regards to extensions. And I'm going to move to the slide, but I want to just keep a note because I know we're almost coming up on the top of the hour. There is a lot of resource material in the back of this. There's the district advancement chairs for every district in there. There's a list of and links to the various resources out there. And so I will send this out to to all of you. I have your email when you registered, and I'll send this out to you, in the next couple of hours. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Fred to talk about extensions.
Okay. Occasionally it happens that while a life scout, and this is a key word, this scout must be at the life rank before they can be considered for an extension. And what happens, sometimes there are circumstances that couldn't be anticipated and they're beyond the control of the scout and are severe and not the norm in the scout's life. It can be a death in the family. It can be a case where their house burnt down. There can be a number. The scout was in a car accident and hospitalized for 2 months. All valid reasons to consider giving the scout extra time to work toward their EGLE requirement. And this also sometimes comes to be if a scout's special needs are more minor in nature, have slowed him down, but not to the point where he qualifies for a extension, registration beyond the age of 18, because once that goes that direction, then as long as they're a registered scout, they're entitled to make EGLE. So like Sally said, they could be 30 years old. This extension, we can at the council level can give them up to 6 months more time to work on EGLE, depending on their circumstances, and each one is judged differently. This is something that's relatively new prior to last year, all the extensions had to go back to national. And at the top of the form, they said specifically, very few are granted. So now we have this ability at the local council to process an extension. On our council webpage, there's an application form. It gets submitted to Mr. Marcelo Vargas, our council advancement liaison. And then we hand it out to the committee and we all kind of discuss it and research it. And that's where a case where it has to be documented. It has to be explained why they need what they need. Sometimes it's 2 months, sometimes it's 3 months. If it's more than 6 months, then we would reject it and they could take it to national and say, hey, for whatever reason, I need 9 months time to make Eagle. And I want to backtrack a little bit and say something very, because this last year, COVID really set a lot of people back. And so we've had a lot of scouts in the last year that requested an extension based on COVID restrictions, not allowing them the ability to complete their Eagle project specifically, or their camping merit badge or something like that. But we can also have a case where somebody that was right on track to make Eagle a year and a half ago, they had just enough time to make their star, life, and Eagle rank, and say maybe they're still at star, and when they make life later this year, they will no longer have 6 months time left to work on Eagle to qualify. Well, that would be something that once they make life, they could petition for additional time to complete the requirement, and they would have to cite what happened, that prevented them from making rank in a timely fashion, and it could be considered. It's still not a guarantee. And so each case is judged independently and reviewed, and we try to give the benefit of the doubt where necessary to the scout. But it is an opportunity for them to complete, even though they've gotten to their 18th birthday. Final point on that is once they're 18, they have to fill out an adult application. They have to take your YPT training because they're an adult. They can't be sleeping in a tent on campouts with the people that were in their patrol. Once they turn 18, they're an adult and they have to abide by all the youth protection guidelines that we have in place. Any more comments on that? I was trying to stay within the timeline.
Yeah, thank you, Fred. We have 2 minutes. If you have any questions, if you want to throw them in the chat, we'll try and respond. Or if you have some questions, once I email the slides to you, if you want to ask them, we will address them. I apologize that we didn't have more time for Q&A. I want to thank Fred, Sally, and Laura for all of their wisdom and experience in the discussion today. Is there one question out there that you want to ask, that you're dying to ask before we wrap it up? Bob, you're not allowed to ask anything.
I want to make a comment about resources that I didn't see on your resource page. On the national webpage under advancement resources, there is do you have it out there, advancement resources?
Yep.
Don't see it. On the national webpage under advancement resources, there's a lot of PowerPoint presentations. There's some video files where they talk about judgment calls and a variety of other situations where maybe that will help you as far as an addition to what we presented here.
Thank you, Fred. Well, it's the top of the hour. Thank you guys all for attending, and thank you for the job that you do as the advancement chair for your unit. So thank you so much.
And reach out to your district advancement chairs.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Todd.
Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys. Thank you, Laura.